those, those who have shown ability and perseverance. So if you have the ability and the perseverance, you shouldn't be prevented from studying. Next, rather sorry about that. So we'd also like to increase productivity through our factors of production. So we have opportunity, we have natural resources in this country. We are known for this. Capital stock as well. By many accounts, we're still the most developed country in Africa. There's high unemployment in the country, but this can be seen as labor potential and human capital potential we can unlock through education. So there are some solutions I'd like to pass by. I'd like to speak on very quickly. I'd like to touch on. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Just some possibilities is we could look at maybe providing tiers of financial help to those who are financially incapable. So from a finance perspective, we could tier it to say that only the poorest would have truly free education, the middle class could have subsidized education. The next point could be that we could provide financial help to those wanting to study in fields where we have scarce skills in, such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and we could provide financial help for those. These are some possibilities, but I feel these are solutions that don't really tackle the issue at hand. So I'd like to deviate for a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so Henry Ford once said if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Henry Ford's today's problem was slow transportation, and the desired future, if you had to look at what people were asking for, was faster transportation. And so Henry Ford gave people automobiles, meaning access to faster transportation without having to resort to horses. A little closer to home, in banking. In the bank, people asked for more branches because they were tired of standing in long queues. So today's problem then was long queues and branches, and the desired future was shorter queues and branches. And banks decided to give people internet banking. So my thinking is there a lateral solution for today's problem to bridge the gap to our desired future? So we spoke on today's problem, we've spoken on our desired future. I believe there is a solution if we can challenge the belief that a tertiary institution must exist in a physical form. In the same way that we're starting to get away from the belief that to run a business you have to have a physical office to run it from. And then I believe then that technology gives us an opportunity to look at now, especially technology gives us an opportunity to look at the option of an accredited online university. So the important features for this to be viable are that we need to ensure that the qualifications are accredited. This is most important as students and alumni of the accredited online university must know that qualifications from this institution actually mean something. We can also then explore zero-rated broadband access to this online university, which means students must be able to access this university without incurring data costs. We do see this happening where there are some telecoms companies offering zero-rated access to websites such as Wikipedia, so people can access the knowledge without having to pay data costs. There's also access to devices or equipment. There's an opportunity there of reducing the costs by inheriting computer equipment set for cyclical disposal by corporations. So every few years, corporations dispose of their equipment, and we can then look at using those and maybe transferring or spreading these around to the students that would be studying in this online university. And then, of course, digital online learning material. We now have the opportunity of online learning material to reduce or eliminate the cost of learning materials such as textbooks. And just a few advantages. I think that although there may be a high initial investment to build the accredited online university, the ongoing operational costs should be greatly reduced when compared to a traditional tertiary institution. So there's potential for highly interactive learning material to bridge the gap between different learning styles, and material can take the form of videos, interactive animations, and the like. Students can then also forego the cost of food, accommodation, and transportation, as the university can be accessed from anywhere. You don't have to leave home. All the required learning material can be incorporated into the lessons or courses available, and we can eliminate the cost of learning materials as well. And then free access, we can explore then the giving free access to more students. So if done right, this means more South Africans can get access to education and the opportunity to a tertiary qualification. Thank you, and that's my presentation in a nutshell.
speaking about an advantage of an online university and going through some of the benefits.
The cost of building an online university, the actual development cost would be far less, I think, than having to build more traditional physical universities. There is a lot of research that would have to go, or a lot of effort would have to go into building the actual material and making sure that the actual qualifications from this university can be accredited. But I haven't actually looked at the costs yet.
Have you looked into the question of the practicality of it from a logistical point of view? I mean, so much of our population is not IT equipped. How would you answer that?
So that's a very good question. So the way I see it, if you look at our situation now, right, there is the logistical issue of how to actually equip people with IT. And one of the suggestions I made in the slides, in the presentation, was the opportunity of using equipment that corporations are actually what corporations would actually throw away, and building those or giving those to communities to use to access this online university. So that's one aspect of it, and I also think that I don't know if it's an all-encompassing or perfect solution, but I think it is better than nothing. It would be something that would be better than nothing.
I must tell you that we have another set of representations which suggested something similar to what you are proposing through the use of internet cafes.
That's an option. Sorry about that. So that's definitely an option. I mean, in my opinion, at a project level, you could then look at the detail. You can then assess how to tackle issues such as those, you know. So this is me speaking from a high level. There are all sorts of other issues we could actually bring up, but at a project level you could then try to tackle. You'd say, okay, we have this as an issue, how can we then tackle that? It could be through internet cafes. We could all in all, it is issues that we can tackle when we look at it from a sort of at a lower level project perspective, I believe.
I take it that you haven't looked at the question of what the effect would be on the existing university system.
So to that, I believe that there could be an impact somewhat if it's successful. But if it is successful, then it's just that. It's successful. There could be an impact, but there are certain types of qualifications, I believe, that we couldn't actually build onto this online university. For instance, if we're doing engineering and there's lab work involved, then you can't get around actually going to a physical institution and playing around with your chemistry and but all in all, though, I think it's if it does work in such a way that universities or it can affect universities, then it is successful. Then that's the end goal achieved, in my opinion.
Mr. Maslang, may I just ask you a few questions about the funding of your university career? How is it that you funded your education, your higher education?
So what happened is, in my first year, my dad tried to take care of it, and then he started having issues paying along the way. So what happened is I had family who tried to help out, but then the opportunity for a job came up. So I took the job, and in this job, I then qualified for bursaries that I then used to study. So I used to study part-time while working full-time at the job, and that's how I funded my own university.
And did you apply for NSFAS funding?
I didn't actually explore getting NSFAS funding. I have a bit of a, so I was trying to get away from getting into debt to study, if that makes sense, personally.
So you didn't apply for NSFAS funding because it was a loan that had to be ultimately repaid. And had it not been a loan, had it been, for example, a bursary, would that have made a difference to you?
I do believe it would have made a difference. I don't know if is it feasible to give everyone a bursary, to just give money out in that way. That's another question entirely, but I do think it would have been a bit more attractive had that been an option.
And did you explore private sources of funding? Did you explore, for example, private bursaries, etc.?
Yes, I did. And unfortunately or fortunately, I'm sort of fall into the missing middle market. So which means I wasn't poor enough to actually qualify for bursaries. So that was my situation.
And from your own investigation, maybe you can give us an idea of the experiences of the missing middle and the kind of opportunities out there to secure sources of funding.
Wow, that's a tough question. I'm really prepared to answer that question. But I mean, for me, if there is, this could be something that works well for the missing middle, this online university, because those are people that may have access to computers and devices. So in my mind, this would be something that could be viable as an option for that. I haven't really thought of any other viable options for the missing middle specifically, though.
But if I understand what you said, that notwithstanding the fact that you were part of the missing middle, your father couldn't afford to keep you at a university.
So that's true. So again, it didn't mean that we were poor at home. It's just that there were other expenses. So the additional cost of having to go to university was something that was a little too much for him to handle, I guess. It was a little arduous. It was a bit of a... it was something that he couldn't afford with the money that he did get, or he does get. So it's the money that he does get doesn't, or rather, the money that he does get, sorry about that, is money is equivalent to, or sort of puts us out of the market, out of the poor market, but he also has expenses that sort of prevented him from actually fully paying for my fees.
And just lastly, maybe because we're trying to get a sense of the lived reality of being a student out there, if you can just describe to us the experience of having to work and then put yourself through university, what that was like.
Okay, so the experience of working while putting myself to university, I think for me personally, it was a gratifying experience. It was tough because you do spend a lot of time outside of work. You have work that you have to do, and you also have to have employers that are a bit more patient about the fact that you will leave a little early on certain days so you can make it in time for your lectures. All in all, it just meant that there was a lot less time for me. But I also, but there was, how to put it, there was a lot less time for me, but I also, wow, okay, my mind, I just can't think. I think I'm a bit nervous, by the way, sorry about that. So what it was is that it was tough, but it was a good feeling. It was a gratifying experience being able to work and then pay my way through university myself, so to say, through my bursary.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have no further questions.
Douglas, on that one, so is it your submission to the Commission that it is feasible if we maybe explore the options of online varsities and use the internet even more? Or can you articulate that better? Thanks.
Yes, sorry, I do believe that it is actually feasible. I do believe in the ability of technology to take limited resources and help us use them better. I do believe that technology is a great catalyst, and with limited resources, we can then do more with them. Yeah, so already we do have certain options. There is already what are called massive open online courses. So things like Khan University, and through that, there are actually courses that are available for people to take, to go onto the internet, onto a website, and to study through there. The only problem with those is that they're not accredited. So if we could explore an option that is accredited, I think it could solve some of our issues.
Do you not regard UNISA as an online university?
So I think UNISA is a great thing because it's correspondence, but I don't really regard it as an online university. So It's a university of correspondence. There's still physical books, physical learning material that you need to buy. There are implicit costs. There are other costs involved in going through UNISA. I think it is a great thing, and I believe that UNISA does reach out to a lot more people. But I do think that because of there are greater operational needs that UNISA has as compared to an online university.
Thank you, Mr. Mahlangu.
Well, the Fees Commission, they're continuing in Pretoria. Student Mahlangu, they're being grilled on the benefits of online university as the Commission continues to explore ways in which fees or high fees at higher education's institutions at universities could be sorted out or found some resolution. We'll take a break. When we come back,
Is Mzenzele Mwanza Pahla, a registered master's student at the University of Johannesburg. Ms. Pahla, over to you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Sorry, these do not look like my slides, so I'm a little bit. Yes, they're just sitting up. Okay. All right. Okay. Yes, there we go. These look familiar. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zenzile Mwanza Pahla, but you can call me Zenzi, and I will be telling you a little bit about social policy financing. And I'll be making a case for the Employer of Last Resort program in South Africa as a funding model for higher education. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, social policy decisions reflect a conflict of values, which results in a lack of policy choice. These solutions mostly assume tax financing. However, through the state theory of money, employer of last resort programs may provide the solution to policy dualism. With my slides. There we go. Sorry. Okay, but as you can see, my statements still stand. As you can see, the slide actually shows the theoretical debate where this emanates from, and it's a debate usually, it starts between Keynes and classical economics. And on the one hand, we have the Keynesians who believe in a steered economy, pro-government, human suffering and job protection. And we have the classicals, who are represented by Friedrich Hayek, and they usually believe in free market forces. They are less government friendly. They believe more in entrepreneurship and economic stability. Next slide, please. Currently, higher education is expected to contribute to international competitiveness through both social and economic transformation. However, this overlooks the conflicting nature of socio-political and economic policies. If we want to increase international competitiveness on the one hand, we must pursue economic transformation. And if we pursue economic transformation, this will lead, If we pursue economic transformation, we have to run our universities as corporate enterprises. However, despite the benefits, this leads to increased exclusivity of higher education. On the other hand, if we want to increase international competitiveness, we must pursue social transformation. And if we pursue social transformation, we must run universities as public enterprises. Running universities as public enterprises is highly likely to lead to the promotion of inclusive, enhanced, and competitive higher education within South Africa.
Sorry, could you speak just a little more slowly?
Sorry, yes, I will do. Okay. Next slide, please. Universities belong to the social sector, where they garner their overarching goal of enhancing societal well-being. Dees and Elias 1998 identify 3 core academic values that stand to be threatened by increased institutional financial autonomy. Those 3 values are knowledge sharing and the creation for public good, priority of academic duties and public interest, and the third being the distribution of power and resources in the social mission. Let's take a brief look at each of these conflicts. Next slide, please. Both business and universities value the creation of knowledge. However, they differ in the values and norms surrounding knowledge dissemination. While business considers competitive strategies, universities prefer open sharing. Next slide, please. While the role of business is more of a top-down approach where investor value drives economic prosperity, the role of universities is more bottom-up, where they create new knowledge and unbiased information through the production of high-quality education. Next slide, please. Finally, for businesses, resources should flow to the most economically productive uses based on competitive strategy, which facilitates creative destruction. On the other hand, the distribution of higher education, in terms of universities being run as intrinsic sites of civil society, should not be primarily governed by market forces, because it's healthy to have a diversity of disciplines and perspectives to be maintained in society, despite them not necessarily being economically viable. Next slide, please. These conflicts have resulted in a lack of real policy choice. On the one hand, still the previous slide. Thank you. On the one hand, increased institutional autonomy may take the burden off student fees. However, it is likely to skew power and resources to the most attractive commercial interests, and universities may not be effective in the social mission. The idea there is that a public good will be threatened by private incentives. But on the other hand, governments are also constrained because of Washington consensus and fiscal discipline. Next slide, please. The current financial model in South Africa for higher education involves 3 pillars. The first is government grants, which constitute the largest share, but however, as previously mentioned, government finances are being constrained by fiscal discipline. The second pillar is student fees, and as we know, student fees has increased by approximately 9%. This is from the South African Reserve Bank quarterly bulletin. And the third source is private sources, and unfortunately, private sources have not compensated for either the decrease in government grants or the increase in student fees. With NSFAS not filling the gap and reduced government spending, increased institutional autonomy is likely to lead to increased exclusivity of higher education, as well as a decrease in competitiveness based on development. Next slide, please. As stated previously, most solutions assume some form of tax financing. The optimal tax financing model is usually a tax financing model with deferred charges, but this is based on misguided theoretical assumptions that all governments operate like households and face budgetary constraints. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at solutions in the current paradigm. There are 3 forms of tax funding with deferred charges. The first being income contingent loans. Income contingent loans are based on a system where the student begins repayment after reaching a threshold income that they have earned. NSFAS is an attempt at implementing income contingent loans in South Africa. However, we do experience the problem of graduate repayment as well as high graduate unemployment. The second option is graduate tax. This is the most equitable option. However, it is the least popular because it must be applied to all graduates regardless. And it is applied more like a head tax. The idea behind it is that the state will provide a grant for education, and also, in addition, will require a special taxation requirement to pay the debt back after graduation and once the student has a job. The third is human capital contracts. Human capital contracts are contracts between students and private companies who fund students. Students are committed to employment for a defined period after graduation and pay a percentage of the income back. Despite removing the burden of student fees, investors will, however, only invest in such contracts if the value of the student exceeds the cost to fund the student, which again shows a skewness of involvement. Next slide, please. Yes.
Skewed. What's the context?
Yeah, great. If it's flashing, it means somebody else's is on and I can't hear you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, the thing with private sector is that they will only invest in things based on cost-benefit analysis. And they are likely to only, I mean, if we look at private sector, they will only go for, I mean, like financial management courses, and law firms are big in the private sector, and insurance companies are big in the private sector. So they will only go for, and they will only want to fund students who are studying courses which are relevant to their industries. So that means that not everyone will have access, and we will now limit the diversity of studying in and diversity of courses in the country, because everybody will only want to study what is being funded, and it will skew then the opportunities for everyone. Does that clarify it a little bit?
It does. I was listening mostly to what you were saying, that the repayment options are available for the students when they've been funded. And I thought maybe we were going along those lines, whether it's an option, does it create feasibility or not? Or if it becomes skewed, what would create a leveling ground on that? Thanks.
Okay, I'm getting to what will create the leveling ground now. That's the new that's the new paradigm in which I will speak. This was just showing you what the available economic options or theoretical options in academic literature. This is what is mostly available in literature. Okay. Continuing, once again, the real problem lies in the theoretical foundation. Orthodox macroeconomics teaches that governments have three sources of financing for expenditure, being taxation, domestic borrowings, and corporate borrowings. This limits its ability to provide social services. The state theory of money, however, says that this is a misguided assumption, given that most governments operate in a modern, complex monetary system. Next slide, please. Modern monetary theory states that a sovereign currency government operating in a modern monetary system does not face any operational financial constraints. This based on the theory of functional finance. It is not essential for a sovereign currency government to finance expenditure either through taxation or borrowings. In a modern monetary system, a government spends by debiting bank accounts of recipients and crediting bank reserves. Next slide, please. This slide I will explain a little bit. Okay, the story starts with the government. Firstly, the central bank is the bank for the government, and commercial banks are banks for the private sector and individuals like you and me. So, It starts where, this is now government spending. It starts where the government creates a liability, and that liability translates to a matching transaction of assets to the central bank. Once those assets are generated, or loaned, sorry, once those assets are loaned to the central bank by the government, the central bank is now enabled to create reserves. Once it creates reserves, those reserves enable commercial banks to extend deposits and extend deposits, and they act as a buffer against liquidity risk for commercial banks. Okay. From this perspective, government spending creates currency through the creation of a money-denominated government liability. Next slide, please. It is worth noting the different types of money and what they mean at this point. Bank reserves are non-interest earning, high-powered bank money that simply acts as a buffer against liquidity risk. Bank reserves are not inflation, bank reserves do not generate inflation. What generates inflation usually is your fiat currency, which is your notes and coins in circulation. Next slide, please. In contrast, taxation destroys money through government crediting taxpayers' accounts and debiting bank reserves. The implication is that a government deficit now becomes a balance sheet position of credits exceeding debits, with net credits or net deposits in the private sector. The opposite is true for budget surpluses, which will be debits exceeding credits, with net debits in the private sector. It is through these mechanisms, and the realization that deficits up to the point of full employment are not inflationary, that we can begin to look for solutions. Next slide, please. Based on the state theory of money, Cherneva and Kaboob proposed the alternative use of an employer of last resort program. The idea is for the government to act as spender of last resort, whose responsibility will be to keep the rate of aggregate spending at the rate at which current prices would buy all goods and services in the economy that it is possible to produce. If the spending rate is higher than this rate, it would cause inflation, while if the spending rate is below this rate, it will cause unemployment. An employer of last resort program can create infinitely elastic demand for labor at a fixed minimum wage that does not depend on aggregate demand. Government would provide jobs to willing, able, and needy individuals with the goal of price stability and full employment. Next slide, please. Okay, the Employer of Last Resort program is the Employer of Last Resort program provides a fixed wage as a price anchor. During a recession, the Employer of Last Resort program pool will increase to absorb displaced private sector workers, and it operates as a buffer against unemployment. The wage is fixed, but the quantity of labor fluctuates. All right, so basically the idea is it acts as an anchor for price stability. Using the slides to explain, the wage will be fixed by the government, and it'll be a living wage, a subsistence wage, and all private sector companies would then be able to employ laborers at a cost or fixed wage plus markup. So then that fixed wage will always be that fixed wage, and there will be a set markup which they would use, creating some price stability. Okay. In addition, the Employer of Last Resort program will not displace private sector jobs, because it will provide jobs which are undersupplied or not supplied by private sector, such as companions for the elderly, public sector classroom assistants, low-income housing engineers, environmental officers, daycare assistants, and community and cultural historians. Okay, next slide, please. Capitalist economies lack the mechanism to create full employment. Neoclassical economists have considered that unemployment is only a transitory phenomenon and minimized or denied involuntary unemployment. They argue that the market will eventually clear and government should reduce spending and encourage downward wage flexibility. As we see, however, by the pictures, we have had ongoing involuntary unemployment
both we have rising graduate unemployment and youth unemployment, as well as increased unemployment in various sectors, especially with people who have skills like in the picture it shows plumbers and electricians and such industries. Next slide, please. Okay. Most support the idea of full employment, however they challenge structural changes, inflation and wage price spiral when it comes to employer of last resort programs. Structural changes in terms of the employer of last resort program, structural changes and technology must be institutionalized in that employer of last resort programs must have a watch list of at-risk industries and regions in order to be ready to take action. Inflation critics argue that employer of last resort is nothing more than a Keynesian demand stimulus policy. However, full employment is guaranteed regardless of aggregate demand, and the program is financed by increasing non-inflationary bank reserves. Wage price spiral critics argue upward pressure on wages will occur from workers earning below the living wage. However, this would in implementing an employer of last resort program would only cause a one-time wage adjustment without accelerating inflation. Under an employer of last resort program, the appropriate monetary policy would not be interest rate policy, but rather open market operations in order to maintain the interbank overnight lending rate. I will briefly share 3 case studies that show that the relative cost to GDP is too small to be considered inflationary. Next slide, please. Okay. The first case study is Argentina. In Argentina, they implemented the Head of Household program, which reduced indigenous rates, increased female participation, and the cost was less than 1% of GDP. There are some negatives, however. This program was financed through foreign debt, which does not have the same benefits as being financed through central bank reserves of a sovereign currency government. In addition, although this particular program increased the income of the poor, it hasn't pulled them out of poverty because this particular program restricts participation and the employer of last resort wage is below the poverty line. However, it does show a step in the right direction. Next slide, please. The second case study is India, where they have implemented the National Rural Employment Program. This is targeted towards labor-intensive industries, and the program is designed to fit the specific needs of the Indian economy. With a cost of 1.3% of GDP, it is a first step to a fully fledged employer of last resort program, and it also shows that employer of last resort programs are viable options for developing countries. Next slide, please. The third case study is in France, where they implemented planned professional transition contracts, which are based on the idea that unemployed people actively seeking employment should not be punished for trying to get a job and failing. Okay, the costs here, it is a little bit higher. The cost is 4% of GDP, but that is still less than our current borrowing requirements. And the benefits here are that it guarantees activity income, it includes a job training component, and it is, in the case of France, their program is financed through unemployment insurance. And here in South Africa, we also have unemployment insurance in place. Next slide, please. Okay. While recommendations within the current paradigm of tax funding and deferred charges are limited to government NSFAS withdrawal payments as a type of graduate tax, not guaranteeing employment, within the heterodox paradigm of the employer of last resort program, NSFAS could be used as a funding pool for education linked to employer of last resort programs in South Africa. Next slide, please. In conclusion, social policy financing is heavily constrained by orthodox economic thinking. South Africa is a sovereign currency government operating in a modern monetary system. Given the rising demand and cost of higher education, as well as the rising unemployment rate, it would be advisable for the South African government to consider implementing an employer of last resort program to finance higher education. Thank you. Any questions?
Just in summary, are you proposing